what about the people who say, if you ask them, how do I make big data simple? They'll give you the one of two answers. One would be, well, you want to be in a cloud-based solution, then that really solves all your problems. Or the other side says, oh, it's got to be on-prem because, of course, all your data is on-prem. So does a cloud-based solution or an on-prem solution necessarily solve your headaches when it comes to big data? Is one clearly and obviously better? Something your take on that?
I mean, I think it largely depends on who you are as a company and where you are in your maturity cycle. I think that as the cloud matures and, as you've got amazing entrants like Google and, of course, there's Amazon, who are, incredibly sophisticated about managing infrastructure, it makes less and less sense if you're a, small company, a medium-sized company, and probably soon if you're a large multinational to start managing that infrastructure on your own. I mean, Google now manages email for very, very large Fortune 500 clients, and there's no reason why they shouldn't manage the infrastructure for, very large data centers where you're processing and managing a lot of big data. So I do think that as time evolves, the infrastructure and the cloud providers will grow up so that the cost of moving the data around is not as high, and the infrastructure cost is relatively lower than one could build in-house. That would seem to make sense. Whether we're there or not today, I don't know. I think it really largely depends on the use cases. And my guess is that Tino could probably, have a much more view on that in particular. So I think data is going to, but largely I think data is going to exist in a lot of different places. I mean, I think we live in a multi sort of, lots of hybrid environment. I mean, there's companies that have stuff on cloud, and there's companies that will have stuff on premise, and most companies have both. And you're going to find data is going to move into and out of each sense for a long time. And so I don't see that largely changing anytime soon. Perhaps over the long run it will. Move to the cloud.
Tino, I sense you have an opinion about whether or not a cloud-based solution or an on-prem solution is better. And I guess as part of my question, I would ask you, what about that salesperson who's on the way to a sales call and her region is a Southwest region. She wants to ask a really fast query from her smartphone app, and she needs an answer in the next 11 seconds. Is that? I mean, what happens when you're a cloud-based big data environment in that sort of situation?
So, of course, I'm a little biased because I work for Google Cloud. The one parallel I like to draw between the private and public clouds is the banking industry. Right? Before banks came around thousands of years ago, you had to keep money in your own home, right? And if you had lots of money, you had to build a fence around your home, and you had to dig a trench, and you had to provide security and so forth. But then through economies of scale, this central location that is vested in the security of your money, that has economies of scale, allows you to do much more with it, right? But there's still room for a lot of folks to have that safe at home, to keep their family jewels and to keep a lot of cash in there. So I think I agree with Setyen. There's going to be, private cloud will never go away. There's always going to be room for private cloud. In the context of big data, the public cloud allows you to operate at scale without having to do lots of investments, without committing a lot of time and effort, right? So that time to iteration and time to value decreases greatly in public cloud. And of course, with the next generation cloud-native products like BigQuery product that I'm working on, you're able to do some incredible things. And one example, of course, is with BigQuery, the ability to scale from 0 cores to 9,000 cores for 11 seconds to generate a terabyte-sized SQL query, and then scale down and only pay for those 9,000 cores for those 11 seconds. This is absolutely impossible anywhere else outside of cloud. Right?
But what about the speed issue for that theoretical, salesperson on their way to a call, and there is actually just a very bottom level big data query?
Yeah.
Is that going to work? Is there still a speed issue for that person, or not necessarily, in your view?
Well, I think you can replicate speeds if performance is what you're after. You can duplicate performance, whether it's in your private cloud or in the public cloud. But when you intersect performance with cost, with time to market, it's an equation with a lot of variables, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that equation overall is much more attractive in the public cloud. Now, of course, there's companies like Etsy who have moved off of the public cloud into back their own data centers because they have a very predictable analytics platform. They know exactly what's going on. They know exactly what they're building. They're very comfortable with it, It's a very static workload, and they're very comfortable running their own technologies. They consider it their core competency.
I've always wondered about those companies that have the attitude. How can they say to themselves, we have a very stable environment? I mean, what's going to happen 36 months from now? I mean, really? There's such a thing as business stability, especially for a business that's online? But, well, okay, that's a different question.
Yes, I mean, I think it's a fundamental question to analytics. I mean, it's funny. I think that everybody, the old world of business intelligence was I wait 2 years. I ask a set of questions that I want to have answered through a set of dashboards, and I wait 2 years for those dashboards to get developed. And I think precisely to your point, a stable analytics environment is sort of in some sense an oxymoron, because I mean the entire purpose of analytics is to ask more questions and to learn so that you can ask even more questions. And so by definition, in some sense, you're constantly going to change. And I think one of the big complaints about data warehousing is, well, it doesn't answer my questions that it would have otherwise answered 18 months ago. And the reality is that should be true because your organization's learning, and the same data warehouse ought to be evolving. And so, whether you're using Google or we've got partners at AltaScale who handle a lot of the infrastructure-oriented challenges. I think the reality is that you've got to that managing the infrastructure is one problem. Managing the human process of asking questions is another problem, and they are different problems at different levels. To Mike's exact point, and we see that all the time. And I think CIOs are really concerned with the infrastructure problem, and we see business people very much concerned with the human process of asking questions.
How does that relate? Just so does that relate to the cloud and on-premise thing, or is it almost a separate issue?
I think they're two separate issues. I think that there's it's a question of look, I want to buy a product. Now, do I buy it online? Do I buy it in the store? There are different reasons for which you would want to do one thing. And then there's the question of which product am I buying? Well, am I going to buy this TV or that TV? And how do I select which TV we're going to be buying? And how do I figure out the analysis to determine which is the right TV? And those are two different problems at two different levels. You might want to buy the same thing online as you might want to do in the store, or you might want to buy something totally different. And there are different decision points, really, for a company to make.
Mike, are you an on-premise advocate, or are you totally a cloud guy when it comes to big data?
Well, you can almost guess my answer is going to be hybrid, James. So, which is
maybe hybrid is really the only answer to that question, really. But
yeah, it's the practical. Yeah. It's the practical thing, and that's what we see happening outside of big data, just in cloud infrastructure in general, or any kind of clustered architecture. Is you have a baseline cost for your stable workload, as you pointed out, and that's probably going to end up on premise in the long run if someone has the ability to do that just for cost. And then you have the unknown part, the variable part, the new part, the ability to do research and development, ask new questions, burst on some seasonality or cycles into a cloud. So, I think it's a hybrid. It's going to be a hybrid world of some kind, which is a half and half answer. But enabling that has been difficult for some time because of big data. It's big. It's you have to make sure you can secure it in both places now. You don't want to replicate it and pay for storage in both places. You do have to be on top of your game to do a hybrid solution of any kind. I think we talked about security before, but I just want to throw out the idea of encryption as being a really key enabler of this, and being able to secure your data wherever it is. But at the end of the day, I think people who say that service providers aren't as secure as on-premise are fooling themselves.
It's one of the ironies, really, because those remote service providers, their entire business is based on being secure. And if you look at all the headlines, everyone's who's been breached, it's like actually public is safer than in-house.
I'm completely in that camp. If you look at the fact that, and I'm sure Dino can throw in some stats here, but the breaches are almost always, and even this goes back to even who steals from the secrets from the government, not just Ashley Madison, but it's always human based. It's a human factor problem most of the time, and in your data center, those are employees that can get disgruntled. In the public cloud, they don't know you from A to Z. You're right. And as long as you can create the isolation, if you can encrypt your data and keep it from mingling, keep it from leaking on there. I mean, you look at the data center. I've walked into data centers. I think we talked about this one time, where people have the door propped open with a chair and a fan sitting on it, and a cord from the fan running over there. It's like, don't trip on the fan because blow the circuit breaker, which will shut down the server.
Also,
and
the
we kind of
password
scratch your head going like, what? This is not secure. And so, oh yeah, this secretary.
it's also the password is written on a sticky note above the screen too.
And, and so you don't see. I mean, you go to any qualified service provider location, and you're going to see, if not tank traps, you're going to see ditches. You can't even drive a truck up next to the building, and it goes from there, right? It's just a different environment entirely. So.